about the show today. Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Happy to have you here. I was told our video audience, kind of our show before the show a moment ago, that we get a chance to do something today for the last time for quite a long time, which is react to a football game we just saw. Last game of the season last night with the Super Bowl. We've got plenty for you on that, all of it from a Georgia perspective. Also, a fairly well-known name around the NFL has given a former Dog pretty big compliment. That gives us a chance to have a discussion about what Georgia football might look like here this year. That is always a very good thing. John Stinchcomb stops by. That's always a great thing. What's not quite so good, Georgia suffered a basketball loss this weekend that put its tournament chances into a harm's way a bit, but we'll kind of give you the reaction there, including sort of a curious decision by Mike White at the end of that game and his reaction to why it was he made the choice that he made. So we'll cover all of that. Grant, it's going to be a really fun show. We're glad to have you with us for. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was thinking this morning, growing up, I was always a much bigger college football fan than NFL fan. A lot of you are. And it's always been kind of hard to necessarily kind of put your finger on exactly why that was true. I mean, obviously, just sort of always been a big Georgia fan. But, what was it about the NFL that didn't quite capture my full imagination the way that college football did? Because, honestly, Georgia wasn't really winning certainly championships or anything like that when I was growing up, but still just thought college football was much better. I think one of the things that may have been true was, growing up, very first Super Bowl I can ever remember, Super Bowl 20, Bears blowout of the Patriots. That was the very first Super Bowl as a child I remember. And from then, for many years, every Super Bowl I saw as a kid, they were all blowouts. That we've had a nice run in recent years where Super Bowls have been close, competitive, interesting games. But that's not what my life growing up was like. A lot of blowouts, a lot of situations where one team obviously appeared to be better than the other. And last night's game was a little bit of a throwback to that, where pretty clearly Philadelphia was just by far and away the better team. In many respects, the Chiefs got the most attention. Patrick Mahomes, obviously Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift, and all of that. Andy Reid's in every TV commercial. There's certainly no shortage of attention around the Chiefs, including the sort of recent controversy of what may or may not have been going on with the officiating, depending on your perspective. Chiefs have gotten the most attention, but it's fairly obvious the Eagles were by far and away the better team last night, which I think is obviously awesome. A lot of you, just like me, we were sort of rooting for the Eagles last night because the strong UGA presence that exists around that team. And, this is one of those things where, some non-Georgia fans have tried to kind of get onto us as if we, Dog Nation, trying to sort of shoehorn ourselves into this story. But honestly, the more you watch it and the more you kind of watch it play out, the former Georgia players and the sort of stuff they got while they were here, being coached by Kirby Smart, being around this culture, it really is a legitimate part of why Philadelphia has become the organization that it's become, now Super Bowl champions. GM Howie Roseman has given plenty of credit for that. While last night was not a huge night statistically for the former Dogs playing on the Eagles defense, Jordan Davis does have a sack. It's pretty obvious the relentless way that guys like Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith sort of go about their business, that clearly has an impact on the entirety of the Eagles defense. And honestly, if you're a Georgia fan today, you probably are celebrating a little bit. And it probably did feel pretty good to see so many recognizable names, so many names that have brought us great joy as Georgia fans, get that chance to celebrate last night. And as we said, not just someone like me who's sort of a self-proclaimed hype man and a carnival barker, kind of speaking all of this. Even guys who are not necessarily Georgia players, or certainly not former Georgia players, kind of also giving credit for the role these Georgia guys have made on this now world champion Philadelphia Eagle team. In fact, let me give you the quarterback here, Jalen Hurts. This is pre-Super Bowl. Obviously, Hurts would go on to win the game's MVP last night. I know that's a great thrill to his Oklahoma football family. But before the game, Jalen Hurts speaking about kind of what made the Eagles, and he was more than happy to give credit to the former Dogs for kind of what has made Philadelphia special during this era. I think this is great. This is pre-Super Bowl. It is the Eagles quarterback, Jalen Hurts. Take a listen to this.
Well, I say to that, I think a big part of it has to do with the Georgia background on defense. You know, and I think that starts from the Kobe Dean and all those guys that were able to play ball in college together and bring their ways to the league. And so I think that has a big impact on our culture, on defense, how they play, how together they are. And then I think that kind of seeps through the team in many ways.
I mean, isn't that amazing? Don't you just love that? And I think that's really cool. And obviously I was joking before about, you know, the whole Oklahoma thing. I have a good time doing that. But the truth is that Hurts was also a part of the Alabama program. And even he says, hey, man, look at all these former Georgia guys we have on defense, and realize that the sort of Georgia style of playing is one of the things that our whole defense sort of taken as, you know, kind of a playing personality. I just think that's amazing. And I'll tell you what it also sort of brings to mind for me a little bit in terms of, okay, what's your takeaway from that in terms of, you know, how it impacts the current version of Georgia football and the version of UGA we'd like to see going forward? And, you know, I'll tell you what comes to mind for me on that, which is we're obviously in a day and age right now in which, you know, kind of the NIL sort of mercenary style of football where you just sort of build a team through how much you can pay players, and you pay players to do a job, and the relational aspect of football is almost, at least through one lens, the relational aspect of what makes, you know, football special almost completely gone. Now it's totally transactional. At least you'd be tempted to view it that way. And honestly, when you see Georgia come up a little bit short in a national championship pursuit in 2024, even I'm sort of tempted to say, hey, man, just go out and buy some players, and who cares if everybody gets along, and who cares if there's team chemistry, who cares if, you know, everybody's happy. Just go out there and buy some players, do like these other teams are doing, and try to win championships that way, because maybe that's what works right now. But when you hear Jalen Hurts say what he just said, and reflecting back on the Georgia players when they were at UGA and the way in which they spoke all the time about the connection they have with each other and the team chemistry they're a part of, and the sort of selfless way in which they go about their business. And by the way, Nick Sirianni, the Eagles coach, is also talking plenty about that right now too, that he really viewed his Eagles team, a world in which everybody's a professional and everybody's about their paycheck and everybody's about kind of what's in it for me, still willing to kind of come together as a team. You realize, oh yeah, that's what these guys also did while they were at Georgia. I do just think that you're reminded that even though it seems like football is getting more and more about the bottom line and the business part of it and the paycheck and everything else, it seems like football is getting more and more about that. There's still a role for connection. There's still a role for chemistry. There's still a role for the sort of touchy-feely part of all of this where guys that do enjoy playing with each other seem to play better for each other. That's what guys like Nolan Smith and others proved while they were at Georgia, and that's what they seem to be kind of taking with them here to the Philadelphia Eagles as well. And it's not just someone like me who would be tempted to say that who's saying that. It's also someone like Jalen Hurts looking across the other side of the field and said, boy, I love my defense, and I love the way in which former Georgia players are kind of powering all of that. Here's the other thing, too, that you'll mention about the Eagles defense from last night. You know, obviously what we just mentioned, hey, you know, the bond, the connection, the selflessness, that's all sort of the intangible part of football. But boy, when you watch the way in which last night Patrick Mahomes, Chiefs quarterback, is just running for his life, you are also reminded of the tangible value of guys like Nolan and Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, who had a sack last night. You're reminded of the tangible value they brought to the table, because throughout the entirety of the Kirby Smart era, from the time, really even his first year in 2016, not a great team, but from first year 2016 all the way through the present day, Georgia has had a good defense essentially every one of those years. Not every year has been equally successfully defensively, but good defense has been the hallmark of the Georgia Bulldogs during the Kirby Smart era. Everyone would agree with that. However, there was one defense that sort of stood apart from all the rest. It was probably the 2021 defense. You can make a case the 2021 defense is absolutely in the conversation for greatest defense in college football history. 5 first-round picks just on that 1 year alone, many future first-round draft picks as well. But the other thing that made that defense, to me, stand out from so many of the other, kind of Georgia defenses that Kirby Smart's put together is that was the one that also had the most relentless pass rush. In total, Georgia that year had 49 sacks. Georgia hasn't eclipsed 40 in any other year in the Smart era. That Georgia just had quarterbacks running for their life in 2021. And to me, it's no coincidence that a team that was that good with the pass rush would also kind of go down as the best defense Smart's had and maybe one of the best defenses of all time. And honestly, when you watch Mahomes last night, never comfortable, always on the run, always under duress, every throw just a little off in terms of the kind of timing that he would want to have for it, you are reminded that it may still be the most valuable asset of anything in football. You love to have the great franchise quarterback, but if you've got the kind of defensive front that can punish the franchise quarterback like that, then you've got just as valuable an asset, if not a more valuable asset. The dominant play of the Philadelphia Eagles up front defensively, that may still be like the one thing you would crave for your football team more than anything else. And when you look at the best performances for Georgia here this season, let's just take the 2 wins against Texas. It still seems like people are having a hard time remembering and hard time realizing that Georgia beat Texas twice. We're hearing all kind of accolades for the Longhorns for the 2025 season already. It's almost as if people are having a hard time. Oh, yeah, Georgia beat them twice. And the way in which Georgia beat them twice, especially in Austin back in October, just getting after the quarterback, in this case Quinn Ewers, the entire time, making him see goes, making him run for his life, that when Georgia was at its best this year, it was also not a coincidence, I don't believe, also getting after the quarterback. They were just so good at that. So when you're watching the Eagles last night as a Georgia fan and seeing the former Dogs doing all they were doing here, I mean, I think that you do crave 2 different aspects of that. You do kind of crave the special intangible connection those players seem to have with each other that Georgia also once seemed to have. We would be led to believe for a lot of reasons this year's team chemistry probably nowhere near as good. There's been plenty of now on-the-record reporting that seems to back that up. That group, when they were here, great team chemistry. You'd love to see Georgia get that back. And you'd also love to see Georgia get the kind of relentless pass rush back that creates negative plays, that puts offenses on longer fields and makes scoring opportunities a lot harder to come by. Certainly you noticed that when you paid attention to the Philadelphia Eagles last night. Now, let me also give you one thing on Kansas City here for a moment that I think ties into Georgia pretty well, and we'll move on and talk about something different after that. I just think, and this is a simple point, but sometimes the simpler points are just the most true. I think what you saw from Kansas City last night is another reminder that three-peats are just really, really hard. 3 straight championships, it hasn't been done in the Super Bowl era. In college football, as we talked about at the time, the go for 3 in 23, it's never been done. 3 straight national championships. And, a team like Kansas City that has a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes and a coach like Andy Reid, they sort of make it look easy because they've won so many close games. But that's obviously an illusion because it isn't easy. It's virtually impossible. And Georgia, along the way to, pursuing a 3rd straight national championship, was basically like a 30-game winning streak or 40, whatever the winning streak ended up being. Georgia had a way of making all of that look pretty easy too. But if it had never happened before, we should have never tricked ourselves and fooled ourselves into thinking it was any easier than it was. Obviously, going for that third championship in a row, really, really difficult. That proved true for Georgia in 2023. It proved true for the Kansas City Chiefs last night. But the parallel may also be similar in this. Start paying attention to some of the early odds for the NFL in 2025. No one's going to expect Kansas City to exit the stage simply because they lost last night. They'll still be the favorite in the AFC. And for a quarterback in Patrick Mahomes that I believe is not even yet 30 years old, on his way to maybe one day being remembered as the best of all time, the assumption on the part of most will be that Patrick Mahomes still has plenty more wins to get in his career, more Super Bowls, more a chance to play in the Super Bowl, that there is no departure anytime soon for the Chiefs from this sort of spot kind of on the biggest national stage of them all. And I would say that for Georgia football, the same thing is obviously true as well. We have seen Georgia in the last 2 seasons not win the national championship, but we have seen Georgia be competitive for those championships in both of those years. And honestly, I think you should take some comfort for that. Nothing in life is guaranteed. Results, certainly when it comes to the end of the season, can never be promised. But we do have a track record to believe that Georgia is very much going to be a factor in the most relevant college football conversations for many years to come, including 2025. So take some comfort in that. Chiefs lost last night, but they're not going anywhere. Georgia's also, kind of come up a little bit short the last 2 years when it comes to winning a national championship. But we believe, much like Kansas City, Georgia's not going anywhere either. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, podcast wherever you find them. And I really say, video 10 a.m. The truth is, most people who consume the show actually consume it kind of on demand after the fact. Like 99.9% of the people who are with us and a part of our show are not live viewers, are obviously live listeners. You're kind of later on when it suits you, and I just want to tell you that however you are with us, I just really, really appreciate you being a part of what we're doing around here. And I appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make it all possible for you. And I want to give you a big heads up about something here right now. Our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, the great energy-efficient windows and doors that save you money on your energy bills, make your home look good on the outside. They are going to be out and about a lot coming up in the weeks to come. And I want to make you aware of this here right now. A lot of fun stuff going down with our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They're going to be at the big Atlanta Home and Remodeling Show coming up February 21st through the 23rd at the Atlanta Convention Center at America's Mart. So I say this all the time. If you want to kind of get your hands on the product and sort of feel what makes it better, the substantial construction of the doors, the windows that Pella's famous for, a great way to do that is the Atlanta Convention Center coming up at America's Mart, February 21st through the 23rd for the Atlanta Home and Remodeling Show. Great way to see our friends from Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Also, how about this fun event coming up? Same basic time there, February 22nd from 2 to 6 p.m. Our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia also going to be at the Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Festival. First of all, that's going to be at Atlantic Station. 3 of my favorite things, beer, bourbon, and barbecue. And Pella Window and Door of Georgia is certainly among my favorites, too. They're going to be there. That's February 22nd from 2 to 6 p.m. And then right there around that same weekend, don't forget, we got Daytona, the Daytona 500 here coming up. After that, Atlanta gets its kind of early spot on the NASCAR calendar. And our friends from Pella Window and Door of Georgia are going to be at the NASCAR Fan Zone at Atlanta Motor Speedway the weekend of the race, February 22nd through the 23rd for the Better Health 400. So if you're going to the race, go to the Fan Zone, see Pella Window and Door of Georgia. When you recognize that beautiful logo, the big yellow circle with the Pella written in script on the inside, say, oh, yeah, that's from DawgNation Daily. Honestly, if you'd go say thank you for their participation in our show, I really appreciate that. And, have a conversation with them. Talk about, what they do, and maybe you'll realize, oh, maybe it's time to upgrade my doors, my windows, things like that. That's what they can provide for you. And as I said before, Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Festival at Atlantic Station on February 22nd, and the Atlanta Home and Remodeling Show the weekend of February 21st to the 23rd. So a lot of really good stuff going down. So make sure you check all of that out. And also don't forget, you got great savings here for Pella Window and Door of Georgia right now, too. You can get $750 off your Pella Project, 0% APR for 36 months when you go to PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. And if you want to give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. All right, we got John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a little bit fun conversation with him. John actually has a Super Bowl ring, so we'll talk about what it feels like to get that and the Dogs that got that last night. Less fun discussion before we're through today. Georgia took a tough basketball loss on Saturday, and a controversial decision at the end of the game by Mike White certainly factored into all of that. We'll have that conversation with you here in just a bit. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. Poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And you may know that the former NFL coach, Super Bowl winning coach Jon Gruden, now working for Barstool Sports. And so I don't even know what show he's on. Some of the Barstool stuff I know a little bit about. Some of it I don't quite know so much. I guess Gruden's overall involvement I'm not all that well educated on. But Gruden's doing a show, Barstool, the other day with Mark Sanchez. You remember him? I mean, I guess he's most famously for the sort of awkward fumble that he was a part of in an NFL game. But he's a former USC quarterback, former Jets quarterback, now working as an analyst. And so Sanchez is on with Gruden, and Sanchez brings up Brock Bowers, and I guess some criticism that Sanchez had of Bowers. Boy, Jon Gruden came down hard on Mark for wanting to ever criticize anything about Brock Bowers. I thought this was really funny. Gruden really showing a lot of love to the great former Dog. Take a look and listen to this. This comes from Barstool Sports. Jon Gruden, some love for Brock Bowers. Take a look at this.
Nobody ever criticizes Brock Bowers. Nobody. Did you try to criticize Brock Bowers right there?
Check the tape.
Huh?
Check our game.
Yeah.
Said he's got to work on his blocking.
Don't you ever criticize him again.
He's got a block.
I don't care. He can get away with anything. Do not ever say anything
You're
bad
talking out of both sides of your mouth.
What he did is unbelievable this year.
He had a couple blocks just like Dalton Schultz.
I'm telling you, leave him.
He had a couple just like him, and I said it in a nice way.
Who's a producer that produces your show?
Ask him. We can turn on that tape right now. I said that's where he's got to elevate in his game. He's had an incredible year running routes, catching the football, but he's got to learn how to block.
4 strong again. Just shut up.
He says, just shut up. I think that's really funny because, honestly, for most of us, we would say the same thing, having watched 3 years of Brock Bowers here for Georgia, that whatever he does is sort of beyond reproach. There is no criticism for it whatsoever because of just how great a football player he is. Was runner-up for Rookie of the Year in the NFL. Obviously, Jaden Daniels did some big things, but Bowers, essentially, a transformational figure of this Raiders organization, with Chip Kelly coming in as offensive coordinator, kind of a new face of the organization. You sort of believe that Brock could be there for a little bit of a rejuvenation for a franchise that could desperately use it. Obviously, Bowers is off to a great start with his NFL career. And kind of the same theme here that we were talking about a moment ago, which is when you watch all the former Eagles, former Dogs now playing with the Philadelphia Eagles, and the kind of the thoughts that it gives you about Georgia football, same type of deal here, which is, hey, when you hear somebody like Jon Gruden so effusive in his praise for Brock Bowers, makes you wonder, can Georgia kind of get back to having the tight end being such a big part of the Georgia offense? Now, I say this all the time when we talk about kind of this subject. I am never, ever going to call anybody sort of the next Brock Bowers because I don't think that's fair. The same way it wouldn't be fair in golf to have a next Tiger Woods. It wouldn't be fair in basketball to have a next Michael Jordan. That's just putting too much on anybody. When it comes to Georgia football, I'm going to be very slow. Probably never will I use the word next Brock Bowers about anybody because that's how good Brock Bowers probably was. But the template of tight end being a very important focal point for the Georgia offense, that can still be true in a sort of a post-Brock Bowers world. But here in 2024, in the first year without Brock for Georgia, it seems like that kind of wasn't true. And so when you listen to Gruden just spilling out praise in every direction for Bowers, as a Georgia fan, you perhaps spend some time wondering, well, can Georgia get back to using the tight end like it used Bowers? Even if we'll never say the next tight end is just like Brock Bowers, because that's a crazy level of, I guess, expectation to put on anybody. But can you make tight end matter in the Georgia offense again, the way that it did when Brock was here? And in thinking about that this morning, one of the things that just sort of popped back in my mind again was, oh, yeah, we had some chatter about this back during the season. I don't honestly remember how much we discussed this at the time, but if you want to go back to sort of midpoint in the year, the former Georgia great David Pollack was on with, Todd McShay, former ESPN kind of draft analyst. I guess now he works for The Ringer, that website. And on there, they were sort of talking about kind of what is and isn't working for Georgia. And in the midst of this, David Pollack revealed some interesting perspective, his viewpoint on kind of what Georgia wasn't doing for Georgia's current tight end, Oscar Delp. And in light of the craving that many of us have to see Georgia get back to the tight end again, what Pollack said back, I guess it was October, about what Georgia wasn't doing with Oscar Delp, this seems pretty relevant here right now. This is David Pollack from a few months ago.
Delp is MIA. He has less than 8 catches on the season. And so,
yeah, which is bizarre for Georgia. The tight end has always been such a big factor.
And you know what? If you want to boil down to it and what you see and what you watch on tape, Carson Beck don't trust Delp. He doesn't. You can tell there's definitely not a level of trust. Bowers, that ball was getting force-fed.
So there's a lot more being said right now about what did and didn't happen during the Carson Beck era at Georgia. I think all that conversation is completely fair. But in this particular case, it's probably also fair to wonder, did Georgia misuse Oscar Delp a year ago? And did we see flashes near the end of the year to give us a nice foreshadowing of what Delp can be now with what we presume is going to be Gunner Stockton as Georgia's starting quarterback? Stockton and Delp we're led to believe, a great relationship with each other. I believe they live together. Is it reasonable to assume that now Delp will have a much bigger role in this Georgia offense going forward? I believe it might be the case. And once again, I'm not going to tell you, and Delp's going to be just like Brock Bowers, because I don't know that anybody's going to be just like Brock Bowers ever again in a Georgia uniform. I think that Bowers is one of the 4 best players ever play, for this program. That's a lot to put on anybody. But can tight end really matter again? And was Georgia probably guilty in 2024 of allowing the tight end not to matter a little too much? I think probably so. So as I start to kind of think about what excites me for what 2025 for Georgia could be, tight end is certainly one of those spots. Oscar Delp in particular is one of those players. He's not the only tight end, by the way, that's also really interesting on this roster, too. That's a very deep position. But for a quarterback in Gunner Stockton and kind of a newish look Georgia offense, a little bit more out of the tight ends, we certainly believe that's an area for growth that Georgia could perhaps explore. And that is Around the Doghouse here today, poured by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And, of course, last night, this true story, sitting there watching the game and enjoying myself some ice-cold Dr. Pepper as I was. It was warm enough weather last night, able to sit outside, kind of have the game going. And as the sun was setting and the temperatures were nice and pleasant, boy, a little Dr. Pepper over ice in a nice glass, I just loved it. That's just the way I enjoy doing it when it comes to sitting around the house and getting a nice, refreshing taste of Dr. Pepper. And by the way, there's a brand new flavor for you to try if you think this sounds like something you love, but the brand new blackberry flavor of Dr. Pepper. This is really good stuff, and it's a really cool introduction from our friends at Dr. Pepper. They obviously have the tried and true Dr. Pepper you've known your entire life, but they've introduced these brand new flavors too. And for 2025, that means the blackberry. So if you want to go to your local Kroger or wherever you're doing your grocery shopping, you can look for the blackberry flavor of Dr. Pepper and try the brand new, innovative, delicious flavor that Dr. Pepper is all about. Because when it comes to college football and DawgNation Daily and all the great stuff here, it's truly a Pepper thing. So check out Dr. Pepper wherever you're doing your grocery shopping and pick up some blackberry flavor of Dr. Pepper here today. So as we told you, briefly before we're done, and by the way, it's great to have Dr. Pepper as part of Around the Doghouse, of course. Briefly before we're done, we'll kind of get into Georgia letting one slip away at home against Mississippi State on Saturday. Also, plenty more about the Super Bowl. We'll cover all of that. But for now, on everything happening around Georgia football and plenty of Super Bowl talk here as well, let's bring on Jon Stinchcomb here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll talk to John Stinchcomb about the Super Bowl coming up. John, if you don't mind, I want to talk about what we were just discussing, though. When I think about what could be better for Georgia this upcoming season in 2025, better usage of the tight end seems to be a pretty good place for me. We just heard an audio clip from David Pollack going back to during the season when he said that Carson Beck just didn't trust Oscar Delp. Whether that's true or not, clearly Georgia probably didn't utilize Delp as much as it could have. Oscar was playing, I think, a very high level of football near the end of the season, had really the lion's share of his catches in kind of the final few games, which you sort of think of as kind of like the stretch run for UGA. How much more do you think Georgia can do with Delp, and the fact that we're led to believe that Oscar and Gunner probably have a better relationship than maybe Oscar and Carson Beck might have had? How much of that do you think can factor into all of this?
I think it can be a big factor. I think it's a matter of what they want to do offensively. I think you look at 2 years ago, and obviously when you have a special talent like Brock Bowers, you're going to run a great deal of your offense through him. I think you're right in your assessment in saying it's not fair to compare tight ends to Brock Bowers. He is the unicorn. He is one of the best to ever do it in the collegiate level especially, and has proven that he has that talent that transcends, especially with what he's done this year in Vegas for the Raiders. So for Georgia specifically, I think it's a matter of identifying what you want to be offensively and creating that identity. I think you've got enough playmakers in that position group, and Oscar Delp leads it, that you can feature play calls and designs that focus on the tight end. And I think that goes hand in hand with the run game. You look at Oscar Delp, you look at Lawson Lucky, you look at the new guys that are coming into that room and their player profile, and they're highly talented in their own right, at least potentially could be. And there's a lot of potential of what that position group can mean to this Georgia offense in 25. But I think it's a matter of identity and a matter of what they want to feature on a given week. I think Oscar Delp this past season in 24, there was a couple of weeks where they wanted to get him the ball. They wanted him to be a part of the offense, similar to the ways they were trying to design opportunities for Arian Smith or Dylan Bell. So I think it was a week-to-week game plan thing in 24 more than just a drop-off or a rapport like David was talking about Pollack between quarterback and tight end. I do think relationships matter. I do think that that factors into the equation, but I think more so it's a matter of design and featuring guys and creating opportunities for them.
So let me ask this, and we talked to Jake Fromm a little bit about this last week too. Here's one of the things I think is sometimes hard for a non-player fan to understand, myself probably included, which is the role that trust does play in where the football goes on a given play. Because honestly, if I'm being candid, it seems like sometimes coaches talk out of both sides of their mouth, which is, the ball, listen, everything's dictated by the defense, and whatever the defense gives us, that's what we're taking. But you also sometimes hear coaches say something along the lines of, hey, it's got to be players, not plays. We've got to make sure that we're utilizing our playmakers and things like that. So if I'm a quarterback, and you're obviously in these huddles with these guys, if I'm a quarterback, how much of where the football is going when it leaves my hand is determined by, I think this guy's going to catch it. I like this guy. I have rapport with this guy. I don't really, have the same level of connection with the other player. Like, how much does relationship between quarterback and pass catcher matter in terms of where the ball goes after the snap?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of being able to trust guys in tight window situations. Obviously, in college, there are opportunities that you get where a receiver is or a tight end is open, and that's a clear read. But if you're going through film review on a Sunday following a Saturday afternoon game, and you're going, I progressed to my number 3 in the read progression. And you look back and you're like, well, I get that. I think it's a matter of, those tight window throws where if it's somebody that I trust, I'm willing to pull the trigger. I trust him in that situation to come up with the ball, to make me right. And there's some guys that, you don't have that rapport. You don't have that trust. I'm not sure on a choice route or a read route that we're going to be on the same page and you just move on. And I think that matters. And so there's guys that have earned that, and it comes with a lot of work in the off season and just good rapport and previous experience. Guys that I've made that 50-50 throw and you've made me right, or I've thought we were on the same page and you didn't. You didn't come up with it. And guys like to turn the page. They like to claim that they do. They like to say that, it doesn't really matter who it is, but it does. I mean, it's human nature. So I do think that guys earn those opportunities to get the ball thrown their way, even when it's not the perfect read or a wide open play.
So last night, the Super Bowl, and obviously we talked before, but the fact that during your playing career with the New Orleans Saints, you won a Super Bowl. I'm always kind of curious because in football, it seems like there's always next game, sort of next day, 24-hour rule. It must be a really cool feeling knowing there isn't a next game for right now and there isn't something else that needs to be done. Like, at least for a little while, you can just sort of rest knowing that you accomplished the mission and you won a championship. And that's what these, obviously, Philadelphia Eagles players get a chance to enjoy right now. But when you got your own Super Bowl experience, it must have been a great feeling to sort of wake up and just realize, hey, we got the job done. And for now, there's nothing else to be done, no other game to get ready for. We can just sort of bask in the glory of a championship. Had to be a great feeling.
It was phenomenal. And I'll say this, you try to live by that 24-hour rule of turning the page. But when you win a Super Bowl, it was more like a 4-month rule. I mean, we were celebrating for quite some time, the parades and the events, the ring ceremony that's to follow months later. Especially, doing it in New Orleans, we hadn't ever won a Super Bowl. So the whole city was reveling in the glory for probably way too long, and might have been a little bit of a hangover as you started that next season. But it's such a hard accomplishment and goal to reach that you want to enjoy it to its fullest. And we've seen so many great players and great teams that weren't able to reach that pinnacle and that zenith. And when you finally do, you want to take the moments in as much as you possibly can. And, your perspective is always important in realizing that this isn't the end all be all for you, but it certainly helps to enjoy something that so few are able to accomplish and so many want to. So I'm grateful for all the dogs that are representing us well in the league. And, they certainly put their mark on the game for the Eagles last night, and it was fun to watch. And watching. And the only thing was that the fumble from Patrick Mahomes that was bouncing between Nolan Smith's feet. I'm sure I wasn't the only dog wanting him to hop on it, but it was a great night for all the Eagles fans and for everyone that was wanting a little bit of a turn of the page. Something different from the Chiefs.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I said this also about the Eagles a moment ago, that to me, when you look at the Philadelphia-Georgia connection, you see kind of a tangible thing and an intangible thing. The intangible thing is that, and Jalen Hurts gave voice to this, that clearly there's a culture that Georgia kind of instilled into these into the former Dogs now in Philadelphia, that they've kind of helped spread to the rest of that Eagles defense. I think it's really cool that Jalen Hurts would say that. It's a very, very generous explanation for him to offer. And I do think it's a reminder for us that, there is still a role for, call it team chemistry, you call it connection, whatever, that it doesn't have to be just straight mercenary. You're paid to do a job. It's all transactional, because on the one hand, sometimes it feels like that's the direction that college football is going. But when you and Nick Sirianni, the Eagles coach himself, talks a lot about an unselfish team, not necessarily just related to the Georgia players, but kind of the unselfish thing overall. And I think that Ohio State, and as much as it pains me, I think Ohio State probably had some of that this year, where those guys did seem to enjoy playing with each other. That even in an NIL age where money is just an above-the-table, ever-present factor in all discussions, there is still a way to have an unselfish team that enjoys playing with each other. It may not be easy to cultivate it, but winning a championship, it's always been difficult. But when it does come together that way, it's magical, and that's part of the story for the Eagles last night, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think culture matters. I think to attain greatness, to be elite, to be special, to create synergy, it takes sacrifice. It is going to demand more of you than at times you're going to want to give. And when you have a culture in a locker room, and what we saw last night, what you hear even from Ohio State, I think that's another great reference, is teams that were willing to do more for the guy next to them. And that's what it takes to beat good teams. That's the reason why all-star teams aren't always the best teams. And you look at rosters and you think, man, these are underachievers at times. And sometimes they're overachievers. Heck, you look at the picture on your screen. TCU at that time, their roster couldn't compare to some of the very best, but yet they were able to compete at a much higher level because the sum was greater than the parts. And I think what makes teams really special, like Georgia, when they won their national championships, is you've combined two things. One, superior talent, but also a second piece, and that second piece is a selflessness, a sacrifice that guys are willing to make, and a buy-in into the culture of big team, little me. And even in the era of NIL and money, what we've seen is to be great, it demands that level of commitment, that level of sacrifice that great teams are willing to make. That not only do we recognize we have individual talent, we've got a roster full of guys that can compete, but we can make each other better. And that makes our team the greatness. We were able to reach that greatness that we're seeking.
No, I think that's right. And then if that's the intangible part, the just sort of straight tangible football part is, John, I love a dominant defensive line. I love when my team has one. There's a certain bulletproof feeling you get when you know your defensive front is just going to be making the other side miserable. And like Mahomes last night, Mahomes may go down as the GOAT. He may be eventually viewed as the greatest quarterback of all time. But no quarterback is so great that they can overcome what Philadelphia is throwing at him last night. And honestly, Jordan Davis got a sack, but it's not just the Georgia guys. You know, Sweat, the former Mississippi State guy, is a part of that. I mean, it's not just Georgia players, former Georgia players who are doing all of this, but it is a relentless defensive line showing up specifically in the form of pass rush. That still may be the single most valuable asset in the whole game because, you know, honestly, while it's great to have the great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, you know, there's only going to be a few of those. And when you got the great pass rush like what Philadelphia has, I mean, that may be just as valuable, and I'd love to see Georgia get back to that. To its credit, Texas games this year, the best moments for Georgia, they did have pretty good pass rush here this year, even still. But, boy, you'd love to see Georgia kind of get back to the business of doing that on a regular basis because it is just about the most difficult thing to game plan against as exists in our sport.
Yes, and the numbers to think of are 7 and 4. At times, really the entire game, Philly was able to rush just 4 defenders, and they had 7 defensive backs and linebackers in coverage. So some teams have to generate that pass rush, and it takes more bodies. And even though you're trying to affect the quarterback, you can't because guys are getting open. Patrick Mahomes is one of the best of identifying where the ball should go and jamming it into tight windows. There weren't any windows last night. And it's because Philly was able to keep 7 in coverage the entire night. There were times where the Chiefs would keep 7 guys. So obviously your 5 offensive linemen, a tight end, and a running back in protection. And Philly was still able to affect Mahomes. Sacked him a couple times. So 7 versus 4, and they're winning. And on the flip side, the 4 wide receivers that were out in pass routes weren't able to win against the 7 secondary players in that Philly defense. So if anytime a team can rush only 4 guys and affect the quarterback the way Philly did last night, it is a great recipe. It puts you in a position to succeed. That's not always the case. Very rarely, I think this was one of the exceptions where there were 0 blitzes and that team ended up winning. So it makes for a very special group. And Philly's got 8 guys. I mean, that you look at the rotation, obviously Nolan Smith and Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, names that Georgia fans know, but there were 5 other guys in that rotation for that Philly front that were very effective. Williams and Sweat were getting home, and it's a testament to their ability to affect the quarterback without sacrificing, without pulling and creating weaknesses on that back end. It made the game what it was, and it was a total domination of a team that's really productive. Patrick Mahomes, I think, is the best player on any football team, and that includes Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. But what was pretty apparent is that Kansas City weakness in the Achilles heel of not having tackles and having to move Tooney out to left tackle, it caught up with them and wasn't able to make up for it, despite the fact that you've got the best quarterback in all of football with the ball in his hands.
I want to finish with this. Mention the fact that Patrick Mahomes may one day be viewed as the GOAT. Well, the guy that probably is thought of as the GOAT right now is also in the building too. Tom Brady was the color analyst on the game. And if you look at Brady's career, right out of the blocks, he's winning Super Bowls and putting together this amazing resume. But then for a while, there was a little bit of a dip there, right? Lost to Eli Manning a couple times in Super Bowls and kind of had this stretch in which the Patriots kind of weren't winning at the Super Bowl championship clip the same way. And then kind of later in his career, he sort of rejuvenated and started winning those again to kind of really sort of put himself in a just a completely different category than almost anybody else who's ever played. But in the middle, there was some disappointment. And, obviously last night, as we said a little earlier, the Chiefs showed you that going for a three-peat's just really hard, that if it's never been done in the Super Bowl era, that ought to be a reminder that, well, it's just really difficult to achieve. And Kansas City kind of ran into that, that wall last night. Georgia had its own version of that when it was going for its 3rd straight championship in 2023 and just not quite able to get it done. But, Tom Brady sort of shows you that, hey, you may lose some, but, you come back and do some more winning before your career is done. I don't think any of us expect Patrick Mahomes to be done winning, even though he did not win last night. And honestly, I think the same thing can be true for Georgia. I believe that it probably will be, although nothing is guaranteed, that while we have seen Georgia come up just a little bit short in terms of winning a national championship in the last 2 seasons, given the high level that the team still plays with, given the fact that Kirby Smart does not appear to be going anywhere anytime soon, much like what many will say about the Chiefs, I don't expect Georgia to be going anywhere anytime soon either, even though their own attempt at 3 straight championships in 2023 came up just a little bit short.
Absolutely. Really hard to do. And I think that's what makes Brady the all-time GOAT is his ability, and you combine that with Belichick. So there's 3 things that come into play to me. It's culture and leadership, and then transcendiary talent, if you will. So guys that are just elite. And I think that's what we've seen in the past from the Brady Patriots era. It's what you get when you have the Andy Reid, Mahomes, Chiefs era, which, it's not at the level yet that the Belichick Brady era was. And then how does that relate in the college ranks? Well, I think the leadership and the character of the locker room is what Coach Smart has created. And you see a number of players come through there, but yet the culture in that locker room, the identity of how Georgia is going to approach the game, the credit for that goes to Coach Smart and what he's created. And what he's combined that with is an ability to bring in top talent across the board. And that's what keeps Georgia in that opportunity, that window for quote unquote a dynasty. We've seen it before. We've seen it from our neighbors to the west during Saban's era, where you had culture, you had great leadership, and high level talent. I've seen y'all's report. I've seen Jeff Sintel talk about 4 position groups from this most recent recruiting cycle, where the top player in that position group is coming to play in Athens. And I think that's what has sustained Georgia's ability to be a part of that conversation, a relevant national champion threat on an annual basis in this Kirby Smart era, is the combination of those things of great leadership, great character and identity in that locker room, and exceptional talent. And that's what allows teams to have dynasties in football, is the combination of those 3 defining characteristics.
John, I love the conversation each week. You always bring so much to the table. Certainly appreciate that. Hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to our chance to talk to you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Always enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think that John said something really interesting there, mentioning Alabama. And obviously, when you talk about dynasties and championship, things like that, of course, Alabama is going to be the standard that anyone would dream of aspiring, to match, Georgia included. But it's important to know, and boy, if you are younger and you don't have as long a memory as I do, this can be easily forgotten. And much like the Tom Brady had immediate success and took a little bit of a mid-career dip before kind of getting back to his winning ways before his time ended, there was a time during Nick Saban's tenure as Alabama coach. I'm not talking about the first year in 2007. They were losing Louisiana Monroe. I'm talking about after that, where people weren't quite treating Saban as the GOAT standing by himself that he eventually became. Bama won a national championship in 2009 and then won back-to-back titles in 2011 and 2012. But in the moments after that, you had the kick 6 loss to Auburn in 2013. You had the college football playoff loss to Ohio State in 2014. And I'm just telling you, y'all, if you were alive, you'll remember this. And if you kind of weren't as involved in college football at the time, this would be very hard to understand, is that Nick Saban was not universally lauded as this guy has invented football and everybody else is playing for second. That's not what it was thought to be. In that same period of time, you had like Johnny Manziel coming into Tuscaloosa and winning in 2012. Even though that ended up being a championship year for Alabama, there was this thought that there was this offensive revolution overtaking the SEC, and these kind of younger, newish coaches like Sumlin at A&M, Malzahn at Auburn, Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss. These were coaches that were doing things a little bit of a different way, and the old school, dinosaur Nick Saban was going to have a hard time keeping up with the kind of newfangled ideas that exist in the SEC. And obviously, Saban had his response back to that, won a championship in 2015, and then was kind of, sort of firmly established after that as a true, great, standing all by himself. But in kind of the middle of his time there at Alabama, there was kind of wonderment. There's some kind of are we sure here? And is this about to change? And is something on the horizon that's a real threat? So the natural conversation that happens around Georgia after coming up short from a championship the last 2 years is normal. And just because Nick Saban figured it all out doesn't mean that Georgia is going to necessarily do it. But a lot of the all-time greats, whether it be a quarterback like Tom Brady or a coach like Nick Saban, has moments in the middle of their tenure where they had to kind of reboot and kind of restore. And that's a little bit about what Georgia's going through right now. Can you recapture the magic from a team chemistry standpoint those old 2021 guys used to have? Can you kind of get back to feeding the tight end the way that you did with Brock Bowers in kind of a new world that involves Gunner Stockton at quarterback and Oscar Delp at tight end? Those are all real questions. Can you get back to playing the same brand of winning football? And how do you navigate the current landscape around college football that makes that more difficult? These are all real questions. But as we said before, much like Kansas City, that we don't expect to disappear from the stage just because they lost last night, we also don't think that Georgia is going anywhere either. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, we've been talking to you about Royal Caribbean on this show at this spot for years. But in the entire time that we've been talking about Royal Caribbean, I don't believe the brand has ever been hotter than it is right now. People are just so fired up about Royal Caribbean Cruise Vacations. And obviously, we take some, pride in the fact that we've been kind of touting that for a long time, legitimately many, many times in my life. And my wish is several times a year. Had my chance to be on a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. In fact, just this weekend alone, I was kind of looking at some Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation offerings of when can we do this? Can we perhaps make this work? And I tell you, if you're thinking about anything kind of related to sort of like the near term, spring break, things like that, you got to try. You talk to Jessica Slater. She can help you out with this. But just please note, it is very, very, precious to sort of find availability, staterooms, things like that for these Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations in the near term. If you're thinking about like spring break or something along those lines. So it is by no means too soon to start talking about summer 2025 and all the exciting stuff going on. Start looking months in advance. This is the time to be planning a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. If you're thinking about the summer, if you want to start thinking about fall, obviously the Royal Beach Club at Paradise Island coming up in Nassau by the end of the year. Now is the time to be thinking about all of that. Jessica Slater can help you with it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Okay, I want to bounce through a few stories here for a moment as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. The other day it came out, the SEC has another massive revenue year in 2024, bringing in $840 million. I guess that's a slight dip from the previous year. It seemed like most of that's based on clerical stuff like, bowl payouts and, new TV deals. And, so it doesn't seem like they did worse business this previous year. Should say that it doesn't seem like they necessarily did worse business than the previous year, but the payout is going to end up being slightly smaller. I will tell you, though, just very, very quickly, I don't care about this at all anymore. I mean, obviously, I guess I'm certainly not mad that the league that we spend the most time paying attention to is doing good business. But I think that whatever the future for college football is, I don't know that future is made better by finding ways to squeeze a little bit more out of these massive payouts. When you divide 800-something million by 16 teams, these massive payouts, I don't know that that's going to make the future any better. And I think that too much the conversation around the SEC and college athletics in general has sort of centered around the how can we make $800 million and a $900 million, and how can we then get the per school payout to be just a little bit higher? How can we get just a little bit more revenue? And I do get, that's just sort of the nature of the beast. I get all of that. But, boy, you sort of hope that at some point in time in the near future, whether it be Greg Sankey for the SEC or somebody else, one of these other college sports leaders, they sort of move into more of a defensive posture of how do we protect what we have? Instead of being aggressive on offense, finding out how do we get more and more money by taking over the NCAA tournament in basketball or by, wrangling the football to do this, that, or whatever else. How do we actually protect more of what we have? Because when you think about what is it that causes that much money to flow into college sports, I think the only thing that you conclude is that people like college sports, and they like college sports the way that it is. They like college sports feeling like college sports. So if you want to keep that money flowing the way that it currently does, finding some way to play defense against those that would change the idea of college sports forever, at a certain point in time, you should probably do that. I saw a wild story. Now, opposing fans have criticized Georgia fans for what they call kind of shoehorning themselves into this Eagles Super Bowl story. But honestly, Georgia's celebration of, by the way, a good number. I mean, the sheer number of former Georgia players in the Eagles is remarkable. And the specific voice that, whether it be Jalen Hurts, the clip we played earlier, Howie Roseman, the GM, who's talked about it plenty, they have clearly credited the Georgia culture for benefiting the Eagles. So if anybody's got a chance to celebrate, we'd obviously be Georgia fans. But the celebration that's ongoing seems to be one that's being done with sort of class and decorum and dignity. Far different than what's apparently happening in State College, Pennsylvania, where Saquon Barkley, the former Penn State running back, was also a part of the Eagles' Super Bowl success. But a local news organization there in State College said apparently the celebration by Penn State fans got so out of control because of the Eagles' win. Now, I guess a lot of Penn State fans are also, Eagles fans just in general. But around the Barkley celebration, the police had to get involved. They called it an unlawful assembly. And then the police showed up to say, if you don't disperse, you may be arrested for violation of some sort of, criminal code. So Penn State fans, also Saquon Barkley fans, happy for the Eagles. They're, kind of local, although Penn State's still like 3 hours away from Philadelphia. It's about as far as I am from Tuscaloosa. So it's not exactly like in your next door, backyard type situation. But Eagles fans, Penn State fans apparently going wild, celebrating Saquon Barkley and the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. Kind of a bad look there. So you hate to see that. Speaking of the Super Bowl, Devontae Smith last night got a pretty rare distinction, becoming the 5th player in history to win a Heisman Trophy, a national championship in college, and then a Super Bowl in the same career. So he did catch a touchdown there late. By the way, becoming the first. This is an amazing stat. The first player who finished his career at Alabama to actually score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. That's an amazing thing. Devontae Smith doing that last night, sort of a rare distinction for him. And by the way, speaking of Alabama wide receivers, it finally happened. Yesterday was the day that Alabama wide receiver Ryan Williams turned 18 years old. February 9th, by the way, which is pretty late to be turning 18. It is kind of amazing that he was 17 for as long as he was. But this thing that sort of became like the major talking point of the entire year, Ryan Williams, did you know he's only 17 years old? Well, guess what? Now he is a former 17-year-old. He is now 18 years old, turning 18 yesterday. So we'll say happy birthday to Ryan Williams, and we will say good riddance to a talking point that I think all of us got pretty tired of, the fact that Williams spent the entirety of the 2024 season only being 17 years old. Speaking of Alabama, looks like they could be on the verge of moving up to number 1 in the Associated Press Top 25. Auburn did drop a game this weekend. Alabama got the win. But there's also chatter out there right now with Bama doing what it's doing. By the way, on Saturday, you've got Alabama and Auburn in kind of the round ball, Iron Bowl coming up. Honestly, to their credit, I mean, like, it is cool to see both the teams from this rivalry playing so well in basketball. And obviously, you got to think that's going to be a lot of fun for the folks there in the Yellowhammer State, that both of the in-state programs are playing as well as they are in basketball here right now. And I mean, I don't think this is ever going to happen, but I've seen several people kind of mention the possibility with Auburn and Alabama playing the way they are, with obviously Florida doing what it's doing this season, Tennessee here too, teams that Georgia fans don't like very much. With all of this going on, the possibility that maybe 4 SEC teams could be deserving of the top seeds in the NCAA basketball tournament, I don't think that's the end result of all this. I don't think that would happen. But it is amazing to see just how deep and impressive the Southeastern Conference has been in basketball this year. Really kind of an unprecedented run for this league, as deep as any has ever been. They may get, if you're a Georgia fan, you hope the list is long, but 13 teams into the NCAA tournament, just a crazy, crazy level of depth, sort of borne out by the fact that at the very top of the country right now, SEC teams essentially playing the best of anybody. So kind of an interesting debate going on between who should be number 1, Bama or Auburn. Those two teams will play on Saturday. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we transition here, I'll also remind you real quick that our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau got some great stuff going on for you right now. You got to have insurance, car insurance, auto insurance, home insurance. There's certain insurance products you just sort of have to have. So choosing the right company to work with always makes a lot of sense. Well, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau have got you covered on that. We say it all the time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So give them a call today, 877-404-1050, 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. Find out why it is that Georgia Farm Bureau is taking such great care of so many folks across our state, folks who actually live and work in the state, friendly people taking good care of you. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about, so make sure you check them out today. So as we transition here to a less favorable basketball story, right now you got the Georgia Bulldogs fighting for their tournament life, not always winning these fights, as was true on Saturday. Late game situation, Georgia gets a turnover against Mississippi State, comes flying down the floor, does not call timeout. Silas Demery then turns the ball over on what kind of turned out to be the sort of last crucial moment of that game. There was some, criticism of Mike White, the Georgia coach, at the end of the game for whether or not he should have used a timeout on the other side of that turnover to sort of set something up offensively and give Georgia a chance down a basket or down a point to create an offensive opportunity that would allow them to win the game. White was asked about that in his post-game press conference. This was his explanation for why Georgia just kind of let it go offensively without calling a timeout. That's what Mike White had to say.
Sure, he's one of the better downhill guards, He's made a lot of plays. He's getting downhill in space and not allowing Mississippi State to set their defense. You had one if you don't feel if he gets stuck playing off 2 feet in a crowd there, you could have taken one. But I've always leaned that way, and certainly have since we've been here. And when you've got a guard like that with the ball in his hands in space, his ability to draw fouls and play a heck of a game, just a tough one. It happens as part of the game. But again, we got to really buy into consistently. We do it at times, and everybody struggles with it. It's easy to say after you lose a tough game. The things that are easier or easiest to control, when you shoot it and it goes in, and your student body's going crazy, can we have 5 guys turn around and sprint and set our defense? We just did a poor job of that tonight. If we did an average job of that, we would win a game.
So a couple thoughts here. First of all, what's unfortunate is Silas Demery, prior to that turnover, was really having one of his better games of the season. But unfortunately for a lot of people, what will be remembered is that final moment in the turnover. And as far as whether or not Georgia should have called a timeout there, sometimes I do like the free-flowing play at the end of the game because you don't really allow the defense to sort of set up and design something to stop you. You can kind of maybe catch them napping a bit. But I don't know that this Georgia team quite has that luxury because, A, they've had a hard time scoring points all year long, and B, turnovers have been a huge issue. So when you let this Georgia team play free and loose, oftentimes turnovers end up being the result because that has been the story more often than not here this year. So perhaps just based on what have been issues that have plagued Georgia all year long, perhaps a timeout would have been the right thing to do there. I think that White's also correct to point out this was not a great night for Georgia defensively, something they have, I think, been pretty strong at all year long. Probably gave up too much easy to Mississippi State, which obviously allowed the chance at a valuable home win to slip away. But finally, I'll just sort of say this. While some of these losses for Georgia fans can be incredibly frustrating, in fairness, this is sort of what life in the bubble, on the bubble, is sort of all about. That if you're winning games like this on a regular basis, you would not be a bubble team. You would be squarely in the NCAA tournament field. And the truth is, while this doesn't quite feel like where you want to be as a fan of this basketball program, the truth is, compare this to the year before, and that year to the year before that, and that year to the year before that. I'm not telling you these were dramatic steps forward, but it is incremental improvement year over year over year for Georgia, to the point now they are in the legitimate conversation to be in the NCAA tournament, something they obviously have not been in recent years. Now, you may say as a fan, well, that's not quite enough for me, and I think that's fair. But this is a marked improvement over where Georgia has been, and honestly, they're still going to have a chance to get the wins that do put them in the NCAA tournament. But obviously, this would have clearly been a very valuable one to get. Unfortunately, Georgia not able to do that, and a tough turnover at the end by Demery with the non-timeout decision by Mike White factoring into all of that. That's one of the main reasons why this game sort of slips away, and certainly something that plenty of Georgia fans were talking about when it was all said and done. One more shout out to give you before we are done here today. How about our friends at Daytona Beach? Now, this upcoming weekend in Daytona is a massive, massive weekend. But honestly, there's so much more going on at Daytona than just motorsports. 23 miles of shoreline, for instance, international airport that you can fly to get right to Daytona, which makes it super easy and convenient. And so many things to enjoy. Great restaurants, awesome outdoor activities, fishing, kayaking, surfing, golf, of course. All of that in the Daytona Beach area. I grew up going there. I've got so many great memories from Daytona Beach, and it's a fun time to make some new memories at Daytona Beach as well. So check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. All right, as we get ready to say goodbye to you here today, we'll do so golden shoe style. We'll bring that music down just a little bit. Obviously, Super Bowl themed today, as you might imagine. GL Moore writing in, sharing some of the memes we've seen of kind of the combination of the Georgia Bulldogs, the Philadelphia Eagles logos. I love the one on the right there, the Philly Dogs with the dog kind of flying on the eagle. I think that's great. On the left there, you see the G in Eagles replaced by the Georgia G. The Eagles got a sort of a Georgia-style dog collar on. Very good stuff. GL Moore shares that. Appreciate those memes. Those are a lot of fun. Really, really, really well done. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? By the way, last night, a former Florida player ruined the shutout for the Eagles. Don't think we didn't notice that. 1,556 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Have a great day, y'all. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let's take some comments. Baruch Dog says, in basketball, we don't look like we run anything on inbounds plays. No movement or picks being set to pop someone open. It's unreal how bad we are at inbounds plays. You know, obviously this is a team that's, certainly had its issues with a lot of stuff like that. Now, when I think about the inbound play, I also kind of think about the way in which they've handled pressure at times, not just the under the basket inbounds plays, but, anything related to offensive basketball has been pretty tough for this team to come by. And, you think, well, if you call timeout, maybe you have the sort of opportunity to create a set that gets Asa involved or, gets the right look, on a jump shot or something like that. This team just probably is not the kind of team you want to see out there just sort of free-flowing because they haven't played well in sort of a free-flowing situation. Let us see what else. Brooke Dog says the Penn State fans with James Franklin as their coach have not had a chance to celebrate very much. Maybe that's why they were, losing their mind about the Eagles. Maybe that's the case. Rambo says some telling comments in the post-game story about UGA struggling with inbounds plays all game long. How do you struggle with inbounds? Yeah, it's been an issue all year. This is at times a sloppy basketball team. It really is. At times sloppy. UGA Marine pointing out that the softball they've already played 5 games. How is that possible? Softball Dogs 5-0 with 2 Michigan teams coming in this weekend. So there you go. Hot start there for them. Seems wild they've played 5 games already. Let's see what's happening on YouTube over here. Tyron Brown says they might as well let Kirby coach basketball too. Maybe that's the case. Andrew Hughes says, which former Dog has the most rings, including college and pro? I think it's Keely Ringo, but not sure. Yeah, so Ringo would have the 2 national championships and now the Super Bowl. It's probably pretty hard to beat. Now, all-time Super Bowl wins, guys like certainly Ben Watson would have won a handful with the Patriots back in the day too, right? I wonder who's won the most. Guy pretty critical of Mike White in here, and I'm not going to necessarily defend that necessarily, although, it is can't deny that, given where the program was, which was horrible, White has made them better each year that he's been there. They're obviously acquiring talent at a rate the program really has never done. So I'm not going to lose sight of that necessarily, but I do get the frustration. Foster Moss also pointing out that Jalen Carter would have had the 2 national championships too, which is a very good point. Is that right? Kaylee says that Ben Watson only had the 1 Super Bowl. I would have thought it'd been more than that. That's interesting. Now, I tell you, you're going to go back in the day, like a former Georgia offensive lineman like Guy McIntyre with the San Francisco 49ers, he would have probably had a chance to win a handful. Obviously, Terrell Davis probably won a couple with the Broncos. That's an interesting conversation. G. Gray says that Georgia basketball is not bad. Unfortunately, the entire SEC is just great. Georgia can beat any team, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of that's going on. What is going on here? I do think there's some of that's just true, is that some of the frustration around Georgia is related to the overall depth of the SEC. I believe that's right. Stick D says, how many rings does Hines Ward have? I believe it's only the 1 for him, although he was Super Bowl MVP. D. Nelly pointing out that Richard Seymour, now Pro Football Hall of Famer, is a 3-time champ. That's going to be pretty tough to beat. That's going to be pretty tough. Let's get some Facebook comments. We may not state. So Hines Ward, we're told 1, 2. My memory's not very good about this stuff, apparently. Yeah, I don't remember Ward winning 2, but yeah, that's cool. But he, obviously won the 1 Super Bowl MVP. So there you go. Sean Phillips also pointing out that Hardman's got to have a couple of Super Bowl rings. McCole Hardman's got to have at least a couple of Super Bowl rings too. Yeah, with Kansas City, then away from Kansas City, then back. But he's been around there for a while. Yolanda Brack mentioning Herschel Walker. The one thing that's cool about Herschel's pro career, even if you subtract the USFL years out of that, he is still one of the most prolific running backs of all time. I believe the case for Herschel Walker and the Pro Football Hall of Fame is probably better than it's been given credit for. I don't think at this point in time he's going to get in, but I do believe his case for Pro Football Hall of Fame induction is probably better than it's been given credit for. Kent Holcomb having some fun with Taylor Swift. Marshall Fleming mentioning Ben Jones, the former Georgia center, who was a part of the Patriots for a good while. I mean, that's kind of the through line in all this. It's like, how many dogs kind of got close enough to New England to be around for a few of those? That's probably true. Susan Levy also looking back to the time in which Darnell Washington was here at Georgia and the value that he brought. Yeah, incredible. Now, different category of player for me because, Brock Bowers is an all-time great, but Darnell Washington clearly very valuable. I also think that sometimes Georgia probably did not feed Brock as much as it could have just because it, wanted to make sure it kept Darnell happy, which was probably a wise thing to do. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders shouting out the Daytona Beach Hooters. Kirk Schultz says that Philly needs to draft Jalen Walker, Dan Jackson. Yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that indeed. UGA Marine says McCall Hardman's got 3 Super Bowl rings. That's a lot. That's a lot. Rambo also mentioning Jake Scott. Yeah, so Scott was on the 72 Dolphins. That's before my time, but obviously, another guy that had great Super Bowl moments, I think, right? On the subject of basketball, UJ Marine says, it seems to me that every loss is something different. It's not like every loss is rebounds or turnovers. It just seems to me that one game it's boards, next game it's free throw shooting. I mean, I would say that as I've said before, to me, one of the most significant stats in college basketball is offensive rebounds allowed. If you're giving up offensive rebounds, you're giving up extra possessions, and that's going to create a margin that becomes eventually pretty tough to beat. So a few times this year, Georgia's kind of gotten plagued by that against like the best, most athletic teams that's play. But the more consistent issue is this has not been what I would say good offensive team for much this year. Missed free throws, not great from three, way too many turnovers. And, this sort of has the double-sided issue of it has made wins harder to come by, but it also has increased the frustration that fans are facing. Like, for instance, Kentucky's lost a few games this year where they played bad defensively. And, their fans are up in arms about that because they obviously have, incredible expectations. But if somehow Georgia were losing games when they're scoring a lot of points, but also just giving up too many points, even if they were in kind of the same basic situation they're in now, I think for the most part, fans would sort of be just kind of okay with that because it's just more entertaining. I think one of the things that sort of hurt Georgia this year is the offensive struggles have been extra frustrating because people don't like to watch bad offensive basketball. Rambo says that Charles Haley has 5. Obviously a guy who played both San Francisco and Dallas. Haley was also in Dallas, right? Of course, not a former Dog. Senior Dog 54 talking about those Philadelphia lines of scrimmage. Yes, so good at that. I saw where Roddy White, the former Falcons wide receiver, last night on X says that Philly just drafts real football players. And honestly, like that's one of those very simple statements that just gets right to the heart of it. Just like real football players in like, real spot, lines of scrimmage, good running game, very good defensively, just a lot of real football. Rambo also mentioning Fran Tarkenton, who lost 4, right? Tarkenton was the quarterback that lost all 4 times to the Minnesota Vikings. Am I right about that? Garrison Tucker says, do I think that K.J. Bolden will be the leader of the secondary in 2025? Yeah, in many ways, I think he probably will be. I believe the expectations for Bolden will be very high coming into this upcoming season. Let's go back on Facebook here for a moment. Joseph Kennedy wants to see some of Ryan Puglisi in the season opener. I mean, I do think that the Marshall-Austin Peay games to begin the year for Georgia in 2025 will be far more interesting than the kind of typical games against Group of 5 FCS teams that Georgia sometimes plays because people would like to see some of Puglisi, as Joseph mentioned. You'll get your chance for that on G-Day too. But also because, after a lot of slow starts offensively, Georgia fans are going to have very little tolerance for that in those particular games. And they love to see Gunner Stockton get off to a great start with his career, presuming he's the starting quarterback. Those 2 games to begin this season for Georgia in September are going to be treated a little differently than these types of games sometimes are. Lisa Hamilton also mentioning Sony Michel getting involved in the Super Bowl ring game. Yeah, does he have, like I said, my memory's so faded. Does he have 2 with 2 different organizations? 1 with LA, 1 with New England. Is that right? Johnny Prescott mentioning those Travis Kelce props didn't pay off too well. No, they did not. Wayne Folan, who, by the way, lives in Pennsylvania, checks in to say it's a Philly Dog Day. Yeah, you love that, Wayne. Ken Holcomb says, yeah, Tarkenton did lose all 4 of those Viking Super Bowls. Yeah. Franchise that obviously has been close many times, including the Tarkenton era, just not quite getting over the hump. And a lot of people don't realize, by the way, Fran Tarkenton also just recently turned 85 years old. An amazing thing. Seems to still be in very good health at 85 years old. But Tarkenton, when his career ended, had basically all of the NFL records, passing records, probably rushing, records for a quarterback too. Many of those have since been eclipsed. But when his career ended, he had every record. What a career it was for Fran Tarkenton. Let us see what else. Let me go back over to YouTube for a moment. See how people are doing over here. Armando Black celebrating the fact that Matthew Stafford, the former Georgia quarterback, recently brought home a Super Bowl. That was fun to see. Andrew Hughes says last night was definitely the most rings won by Georgia players, not including a Georgia win. I think that's probably true. Let's see. Lance D mentioning Terrell Davis, who it was funny. You know, Davis was one of those guys at Georgia that played behind Garrison Hurst in 1992, but was a really good player. Then Hurst left. Davis sort of battled injury, and then, of course, he goes on to the Denver Broncos with very little fanfare to become like a Hall of Fame level running back. Just amazing. Amazing. Amazing career. Shaka Khan pointing out David Andrews has two rings. Foster Moss on the subject of Patrick Pass. Yeah, Cody was talking about that with us one day last week, that if you look at the long streak of Georgia players in the Super Bowl, it's like you got, you know, a couple of years where it's like Patrick Pass was the only one, and you've had a couple of those where it's just been like sort of the one guy, Pass happening to be there in New England's. Yeah, it's really amazing. It's amazing how much of a Super Bowl presence Georgia has had. It really is. Let's see what else. G. Grace desperately trying to cling to a Jalen Hurts success. Boy, sad to see. Sad to see. Andrew Hughes wondering how many dogs will be drafted by the Eagles this year. Boy, I'd love to see that streak continue, Andrew. That'd be a lot of fun. I'd love to see that streak continue. Boy, our buddy G. Grace has been really reduced, hasn't he? Really reduced to a shell of his former self. You hate to see that. You hate to see that. Rambo pointing out that another, quarterback who I guess lost all 4 Super Bowls would have been Jim Kelly. Those were consecutive years with the Buffalo Bills. Those Bills teams are always really fun to watch. Really, really fun to watch. Yeah, so a lot of reaction to the Super Bowl. We're going to get ready to wrap it up here in a minute. Darian Davis from Georgia wondering what comes next. Is it a 1,000-yard receiver for Georgia or a 1,000-yard rusher? I mean, it really needs to be Nate Frazier getting 1,000 yards this year. I mean, as it stands right now, he's got all of the experience in the running back room. But putting that aside, if you had to bet on one or the other, just given the fact that in recent years Georgia's thrown it better than it's run it, you might actually take the receiver now, even though they've only had one of those in the history of the organization, while they've had obviously many 1,000-yard rushers. But as of late, the receiver almost feels like the safer overall bet. But in this year in particular, it just really needs to be Nate Frazier. Georgia just needs that so bad. Armando Black pointing out that Jalen Hurts, if you want to count him as a Bama guy, was the first Super Bowl MVP for Bama since Joe Namath. Georgia's had several Super Bowl MVPs: Jake Scott, Terrell Davis, Hines Ward, Matt Stafford. There you go, Armando. Great argument from you. Great argument from you. Yeah, fun stuff here. All right, final comments. We're going to get ready to go. Grady Darcy says, can't wait to welcome back all those Philly dogs at G-Day. Yeah, that's always a lot of fun, seeing guys like that come back. Always a lot of fun. Rambo says, almost forgot about Zeke Bratkowski winning 2 Super Bowls with the Packers as he backed up Bart Starr. So there you go. Taking it way back, early days. So when I was a kid, I used to have this VHS cassette of like the best moments from all the Super Bowls that went in order. And so I used to watch that VHS cassette all the time for whatever reason. We just didn't have a lot back then. So I just watched the same VHS over and over and over again. And so I learned a little bit about those sort of Super Bowl eras from when I was a kid. Super Bowl eras from before I was born, when I was a kid watching the same VHS tape all the time. Just amazing what we used to do. So I'd watch the old Super Bowl I, Super Bowl II highlights. Packers win both those. Super Bowl III with Joe Namath. I remember watching those highlights. It's kind of funny. Back then, that's all we had. That's all we had. Rambo also mentioned the Diamond Dogs. They're getting ready to begin their season with a real shot at making a run towards Omaha. That could be a lot of fun. So no doubt we'll have a good time talking about all that. For now, though, we're going to say goodbye to all of you. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Have a great day. Let them, by the way, tune up your warm weather. Makes you think about spring. Spring makes you think about your AC. Get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Not too soon to start thinking about that. Our friends at RS Andrews can help you out with all that. So find them online at rsandrews.com. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you.